Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Kim, what do you make of Trump's performance overall? I guess my 2 cents is that I would agree with what Kate said a moment ago, that he seemed relatively restrained. It seemed like he had been prepped. Some of this dynamic might be due to CNN's rules that after a candidate's turn was over, they would hit the mute button so that microphone would be turned off. That was a demand that the Biden campaign had, by the way, which might have backfired by making Trump more controllable than he was in some of those 2020 debates. But he had particularly prepped answers, I think, on questions that he knew were coming. He was asked whether he would take retribution on political opponents if he got back into the Oval Office. And he said, my success will be my retribution. He was asked about January 6th, and he said, on January 6th, we didn't have this inflation. We didn't have this border problem. It seemed like he knew those questions were coming and had answers prepared. Though there were a couple points, I think, where his anger got the best of them. Here was one of them when he was asked whether he would accept the results of the 2024 election.
If it's a fair and legal and good election, absolutely. I would have much rather accepted these, but the fraud and everything else was ridiculous. And if you want, we'll have a news conference on it in a week, or we'll have another one of these in a week. But I will absolutely, there's nothing I'd rather do.
Kim, that was a bit of back to the old stolen election stuff, but remarkably little of that last night.
Overall, I think Trump did what he needed to do, which was to remember that this was not a campaign rally, that he was not speaking to people that are already devoted Trump voters, but rather speaking to broader Americans who needed to be convinced. He came in and he was restrained. Remember, people were expecting him to be grimacing and yelling and interrupting despite the muted microphones. He seemed to have absorbed the rules and decided that he was going to abide by them. He came across as relatively restrained. He had those facts. There were a couple of exchanges, by the way, too, on the core issue that most voters are focused on in this election, which is the economy. I think he made a very persuasive case for his taxes and linked it to growth in the economy, low unemployment, greater investment, companies bringing their operations back to the United States as a result of that. I thought he did well on the inflation exchange, very much making the case that this was a result of Joe Biden's overspending and problems that came about because of Joe Biden's presidency. He was pretty devastating on immigration, which is also an issue that is top of voters' minds. But look, let's also be clear. Trump mostly benefited from having an opponent that put in such a poor performance. There were moments when Trump made arguments that Joe Biden could have rounded back on him on. This was a very Trumpian performance too, a lot of exaggerations that I think a better, more capable opponent would have rounded back and called him out for. He also, I have to say this, on a number of important questions, he just glazed over them. I mean, Kate mentioned one, what exactly are you going to do in Ukraine to stop the fighting? How does that plan out? He didn't really give a very good example or any details on that. He glossed over what he would do for childcare in that question. He had no answer on the coming problems with Social Security. So there were a number of things. And again, had he had a better opponent, Joe Biden would have ripped him to shreds at that moment for not answering the question. But instead, because of the weakness of his opponent and I think the rules, interestingly, of this debate that kind of changed topics frequently and limited the amount of time, there wasn't a lot of pressure on him to have to fully give answers on anything.
It was almost in some sense a win by default. Another place where he did not answer a direct question from the moderators was on his call for mass deportations. He was asked, are you really going to deport 10 or maybe 15 million people who are in the country illegally? And what about people who have U.S. citizen spouses and U.S. citizen children? And he did not say anything, I think, in real response to that question. And Kate, I think Kim is exactly on point here that the moderators a couple times made note of the fact that this was the question I asked you. I'm going to repeat it. Would you like to answer that? And he kept on turning it back toward Joe Biden's record in office. And in some sense, it's up to the debate opponent to press that advantage. And Joe Biden was just not capable of doing that on the stage last night.
Right. To underscore the point about unforced errors, if I'm recalling right, remember when Biden was asked a question about abortion, and he, for some reason, veered off into uncharted territory on immigration. This was extremely odd. Abortion is an issue that Democrats have been winning on, even in red states that are otherwise unfriendly to Joe Biden. I mean, there's a referendum in Florida on abortion that is polling in the 60% or looks likely to pass. So this has basically been the Democratic signature issue for multiple cycles now. But for some reason, Biden, first of all, laid out this totally indecipherable three-pronged standard about abortion that Democrats supposedly hold, that he was trying to take out of Roe. And I think, the charitable reading being trying to explain how Roe tries to balance competing interests between the woman and the unborn fetus. But I do think also Trump managed to get him on the defensive on abortion, which was very startling. I mean, Trump talked in a lot of detail about, while Democrats, for all the obsession about where to draw the line, Democrats say that there is no line and are willing to accept abortion up to birth, is what Trump basically was saying. And he got Joe Biden to say, we don't support late-term abortions. That, I think, would be a surprise to a lot of Joe Biden's left progressive base that has been arguing that there should never be a standard or any sort of government intervention into a decision over an abortion. So that is, I think, an illustrative moment, because even on an issue where Republicans have really struggled to come up with a coherent response, the president was on the defensive last night. And I don't think that was as much about Trump's success as it was about just Biden's inability to defend his platform. So I think that about sums it up.
Thank you, Kate and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us your own debate reactions at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.